Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex. I'm going to be your host for this particular episode, and we are going to be talking about the power of placebo. Placebo is a nice little drug that we tend to use just so that we can say that we are using a drug. So namely, its purpose is reserved to people who are undergoing a clinical trial for a drug, and you need some sort of way to test the efficacy of this drug, or its efficiency, or its effectiveness, so to speak. And so we need some sort of model for comparison. And how we do that is we have what's called a control for this particular experiment. And that control is the placebo pill itself. In this pill, it has a number of different compounds that are more or less not really going to do anything. In some cases, some of the compounds may be slightly beneficial, but for the most part, they're really pretty neutral substances. I say that they may be slightly beneficial because we have shown in the past when some people have chosen to put maybe a little bit of fish oil into their placebo. It actually had a little bit of beneficial effect. That was an oops. So we're trying to avoid that in the future because we really want the placebo just to be something that is innocuous. That's not going to have any effect for this clinical trial because we want to see if the drug that we designed, that we're testing, see if the drug actually has an effect. And so what we'll do is we'll put groups of people into a control group and into an experimental group. And we'll assign the experimental group the drug that we developed that we're trying to test. And in the control group, we're going to have them all get placebos, essentially. Now this is, of course, assuming that we're talking about something that is ingested, like a pill. But there are many other ways to mimic the placebo condition, so to speak. So we have a good model for comparison and a good control group. The thing is that when it comes to placebo, we often see some sort of beneficial effect even if the placebo pill itself is little more than sugar. More often than not, we just have the base of placebo being sugar, being glucose, essentially. So really it shouldn't do anything except, maybe give you a little bit of nourishment to be worth, 2 calories or something. But for the most part, when we look at placebos, we really shouldn't expect any benefit from taking the placebo. Yet time and time again, as we do these studies, we see the placebo group or the control group have some sort of beneficial outcome, even though they theoretically shouldn't because they're not getting any drug, any real drug per se. And that's kind of baffling in some cases. Just because people are like, well, how can that possibly happen? How can you get something from nothing? It just seems kind of odd. And so after kind of working things out for a few years in medicine, we finally figured out, oh, well, it's the human brain that does that. It's the fact that we can get it in our minds that something is beneficial that we're getting, and our minds can just run with it and essentially kind of do the whole mind over body thing and convince our bodies to follow along to some degree. And in these experiments, people are being told that they're given a pill to help their condition. They're not being told whether it's the actual drug or a placebo in a clinical trial. And so when we give these people these drugs, they think it's supposed to help them. And it's that mindset, that positive mindset, that kind of results in what we see as far as a benefit from something that really shouldn't be beneficial. And it just really starts to hint at the amazing power of the human brain. And as much as I try to de-emphasize how special humans are, because really in a lot of respects we are not special. If anything, we are very underdeveloped and very weak in a lot of areas. But the one area that we really do excel at is our minds, which is how we've come to conquer this entire planet. And yes, I do say conquer, and do mean conquer in the most literal sense. We're going to talk about that on another episode. For this episode, I'm going to focus on the power of the brain, because of the fact that we have the most complex brain, the most intelligent brain on this particular planet. It means that we are capable of things that other animals can only barely reach for. And one of these things is the overwhelming power of our brain to control our physiology. So if our brain is happy, if our brain thinks positive thoughts, then that will manifest itself to some degree in the rest of our body. And so that's where we come to this mind over body phenomenon. And we see this in clinical trials, where we have the placebos being handed out. People are being given a drug. They don't know what's in the drug. In some cases it's nothing, some cases it's something. And so even in drugs that really should produce a negative result, we can see a positive result, just because the person taking the drug thinks that the drug will help them. And it's this mindset that becomes so important to look at as far as our daily lives. Obviously it's important to have a positive mindset and to go from there, but you know what? There's the other end of the spectrum, right? Let's say we take clinical trials a step further and we start thinking about chemotherapy drugs, okay? Which are basically cocktails of drugs that are designed to kill cancer cells, or at least rapidly dividing cells, which are what cancer cells are. So people taking these drugs, they know that when they're given a chemotherapy drug, that they are going to experience some negative side effects. Just because of the fact that that's just what we know as a culture, that chemotherapy, it does a lot more than what we intend it to do. It's kind of a shotgun approach. And yeah, it can definitely knock back that cancer, but man, it does have some nasty side effects. And that's pretty much common knowledge now. And so when you're going through a clinical trial and you're being given a chemotherapy drug, then we see a very interesting thing happening. We see a phenomenon where you're getting something and expecting good things as far as it killing cancer, but you know to expect the bad things as well. So you expect to maybe have hair loss, you expect to be sick and throwing up, you definitely expect a lot of pain, just because these drugs are going through your body and killing your own healthy cells as well as the cancer. And we expect these things. And so mentally you see the creation of a different effect that's kind of similar to placebo, in that your mind is kind of generating it or propelling this effect. But you also see kind of the opposite in the overall impact. You see your body reacting negatively to this drug because you expect it to work negatively on you. That is called the nocebo effect. So we have the placebo effect, meaning that you expect something positive to happen, so the results tend to be at least slightly positive. The nocebo effect is the opposite. Whereas if you believe something is going to harm you or have some sort of negative consequences, then guess what? More than likely, you're going to experience some negative symptoms and negative results along the way. And we see this in our everyday lives too, just based on our preconceived notions of things. I'm not the biggest fan of roller coasters. And so I tend to anticipate a bad experience when I go onto a roller coaster. And so our brains kind of set themselves up for success or failure just based on that preconceived notion, on that original bias, so to speak. So when we go into a situation it's important to try to remain open-minded. That way you can more unbiasedly analyze this whole situation. That way you can know whether the experience was overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative. Because otherwise, you're basically just setting yourself up for failure or success, regardless of what these specifics really led you to believe. And it's that importance that is really something that integrates every single part of your life. You know, having an awareness that your own bias influences the result can really open your mind to, oh, well, I need to try to work on that. I need to try to clear my mind and gain my center before going into something that I'm either afraid is going to be really bad, or that I may just consider that is really awesome even though it really sucked. And so it's that importance of self-realization that you really kind of set yourself up from the beginning for failure or success when it comes to these things. And it's all based on your mindset. So if we go into, if I go to get on a roller coaster, I'm trying to think positive thoughts, trying not to think about the possibility of me getting motion sickness, or throwing up, or just fainting because of the G's I'm experiencing. Not to say that any of those things have happened, but I've certainly come close a number of times. So I just try to avoid places like Cedar Point and Six Flags and things, because it's just not my cup of tea anymore. So I try to find my enjoyment elsewhere. But you know, other situations, you're kind of put into a situation where you don't necessarily want to be there, but you're kind of there out of social obligation. You know, like if my wife wanted to go to an amusement park, I mean, sure, I'd go with her. Would I look forward to the trip? No. But certainly at the front gates, I would try to keep an open mind and be a little more positive about it from the get-go. But, you know, the problem is that no matter how consciously you try to think about things and try to anticipate such a great result, your deep-held thoughts, your subconscious, really is hard to overcome. Because I know in my gut that if I get on that roller coaster, probably going to end up with motion sickness. And so it's a struggle, to say the least. But you know what? The struggle is real. And it's just being aware of that struggle is really the first step and can really help you garner the most experience out of life, most positive experience out of life. Because if you try to view everything from a positive perspective at the first, then no matter what, your result is going to be more positive than it would have been before. You know, if you start from a higher point than 0 or negative, your end result is more likely to be positive. Or at least less negative than it would have been otherwise. And so that's where we come to the power of placebo. Almost getting at this other notion that we've kind of heard lately, the power of I am, which is to say it's important to have a positive mindset. They both talk about the same thing. Okay, whether we're talking about placebo or whether we're talking about self-talk, motivating yourself, telling yourself that you're awesome and that you can do anything that approaches you, overcome any obstacle that encounters you in life. We can do all that. And we can do all that by just having a positive attitude at the beginning to do that. Now, I'm going to take this and stretch it a bit further. Okay, because obviously, I've kind of introduced the topics of nocebo and placebo from a clinical perspective and talked about a little bit as far as how it applies to everyday life. But there are a number of things here in modern day culture, in the past few months and years, that I believe really kind of go back to this topic. All right, and part of it comes to this healthy craze. All right, which is great. I love to see so many people enthusiastic about health. That's excellent, because once again, that's the first step, is to get enthusiastic about being healthy, eating healthier, living healthier, being more active, getting more nutrients in your diet, trying to keep all these other factors in mind along the way. And that's great. I love to see that. That is real progress. Hopefully that starts to stem the tide of obesity here in the US, and we can start to see fewer deaths every year as a result of obesity-related conditions, whether it be diabetes or heart disease, things of that nature. And as far as sedentary lifestyle and lack of fiber, I mean, we could talk about colon cancer too. So we have all these factors kind of playing in to exactly what is going on here in the American culture. So it becomes very, very difficult if everybody goes into this whole healthy healthy craze, healthy movement. If everybody goes into it with a positive outlook, well, once again, more than likely, regardless of whether that particular thing is helpful or not, you're going to end up having a positive experience. You're going to be like, wow, that was so awesome. That really worked for me. I'm going to suggest that to all my friends, and maybe it can work for them too. And that's great. The issue is that it becomes very, very difficult when you are outside of a scientific context to truly report results that are productive or meaningful, for that matter. Which is to say that it is difficult for you as an individual to gauge your own performance with regard to a particular health food or health craze or fad or whatever. It's very hard for you to gauge that by yourself because you are a sample size of one. And because of the fact that you have the placebo effect going on. One of the things I see around town here is the It's a Wrap kind of vehicles. And it's interesting because you see those people doing events and trying to sell these body wraps. They're supposed to basically like eat away at the fat. You wrap it around your torso, around your abdomen, and look at that. It'll erase your body, your belly fat. And that would be astounding. That would be magical if it could do that. And so you see a lot of people getting onto this bandwagon and going around selling these things, buying these things, and using them and reporting very, very positive results. And so you start to think, wow, if everybody's reporting positive results, this must work. And that's one of those cases where we have to stop ourselves for a moment. We have to sit here and think, well, has this actually been evaluated by a scientist? Has he or she actually published studies on the effectiveness of this body wrap? Has anyone really described how this body wrap works? And more often than not, when it comes to things like the body wrap, or even some of the other health food type of stuff, these detoxing agents that you can get from health shops, whether we're talking about other agents that literally help you basically poo or pee out the toxins or even fat in some cases. They claim to be able to do that. All these different things, you really need a scientist to evaluate it. Because of the fact that there are so many people that go into this with a positive mindset and they end up having positive results. And so that brings us back to the placebo effect. And it's very hard to piece out the placebo effect unless you're actually doing a scientific experiment with an experimental group and a control group. That way you can see if the groups perform the exact same. Then there may be a possibility that neither group is truly effective at producing a result. I mean, if the effects between a control group and an experimental group are the same, it's really just because both of the people participating in the experiment, both the groups of people, believe they would get better, or that they would have positive results. And so that's very interesting. It requires a real close look with a microscope to figure that stuff out. And then, once you reach that stage, you have to take it a step further and figure out exactly how that particular experimental thing, whether it be a drug or a wrap or something, we have to look at exactly how it's working, how it works at the molecular level, at the cellular level, and how it's achieving the effects that we're seeing. Right? So how is the body wrap literally eating the fat away from our midsection? Well, if we start digging into it, we start thinking, well, this body wrap is sapping the water from you, is literally drying out your abdomen. And then you start thinking, oh my gosh, that thing's just drying me out? That's crazy. It's crazy because of two things. One is, yeah, sure, dehydration. The other thing to understand is that generally in your body, physiologically speaking, you have water going. Whenever water is being moved, you have to have something dissolved in the water to move along with it. Have to, just as a necessity. But you also have other things that kind of just passively drug along in the process. Certain water-soluble vitamins and such. That stuff just goes along for the ride. That's kind of out of our control. And so when you see things like this body wrap that just sit here and absorb all this moisture from your body, well, yeah, it looks great because you definitely look like you lost some weight, and you look trimmed up in the areas where you wrapped, and that's great. But as soon as you remove that wrap, all that water is going to come back. It's not by any means a real treatment or cure for anything. It is a superficial treatment, essentially. So it's really no better than makeup, really, by that point. Because it's very, very temporary. And if you stop using it, you're going to stop benefiting from it. It's just that easy. So it's a little dangerous sometimes when you start looking at the actual mechanisms behind some of these healthy fads. Because then you start thinking, oh my gosh, well, if it's leaching water and nutrients from me, well, heck, I'm becoming dehydrated and malnutritioned. I can start getting some real negative effects from doing this particular health craze. And that's where it starts to hit you. You're like, oh my gosh, I could probably die from doing this. And you know what? You're right. But we see that with a number of other things too. You know, whether we're talking about some of these detox compounds. Once again, going into it, you take these detox compounds, you're like, oh my gosh, that's great. I know I have a lot of bad stuff in my body and need to cleanse it out. Cool, I can take this and it'll do its job. And I'll feel better. And it'll help me feel better. And I am so optimistic going into this that even if it was nothing but pure sugar, I would have a beneficial outcome. And look at that. When we look at those types of items, whether it be a tea or whatever, guess what? Tea does one thing. Really two things, I guess, if you want to be technical about it. If it's caffeinated, you're obviously going to experience caffeine effects. Otherwise, you will definitely experience basically a lot of urine. You'll be urinating a lot, which is kind of what happens when you drink tea of any kind. So of course they can make the claim that's washing out the toxins, because anytime you drink tea, you're going to be peeing a lot. So it's not really dependent on that particular blend of tea from the mountains of South America or whatever. That has nothing to do with it. It's just the fact that it's tea, and how your body responds to tea or coffee is to wash it out with a lot of water. And so when we start thinking about how these different mechanisms impact our lives, it's really the place that we're hardest hit. More often than not, we don't take a huge hit health-wise. I mean, it's definitely not great, especially when you talk about body wraps. But we don't necessarily take a huge hit in a place other than our pocketbooks. Okay, because when people sit here and spend $10 on a bag of tea, that's ridiculous. Okay, that is literally ridiculous. That is highway robbery for $10 for a bag of tea. Okay, or tea bag, I guess you would say. I mean, that's just insane. But so many people are making all this money by just feeding off of vulnerable people who are eager for a solution, eager for something to help them in life. And you know what? I understand that. I understand that. I'm always, eagerly looking for ways to help me in my life and my progress. But I also understand that sometimes I get too caught up in myself. I get too optimistic. I see something that appears to be too good to be true. Well, odds are it probably is. And it's just trying to get myself to stop for a minute and think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Doesn't always work out. There are definitely a number of times that I end up splurging on something that probably is not going to help me in any way, shape, or form, and in fact may hurt me in the long run. But sometimes we have to do things like that to try to give us some motivation. Even if it doesn't directly help us, at least gives us something to do. I realize that's definitely a need in everyone's life, is to have something that makes them feel like they're progressing to some degree, even if it isn't truly helping them progress. And that's where we get into this whole topic, is going into a situation with a positive mindset to have a positive outcome. And that's the power of placebo. And so we can take this even another step further, away from the whole health, the truly health food craze, to more things like maybe probiotics. We can expand it to. We could even expand it to organic foods. And a number of people will sit here and say, well, organic is so much better for you, and I feel so much better from it. Well, if anything, conventional foods have been shown to have more nutrition in them because they're often modified by some way, being a GMO. They're often modified to have more nutrients in them. So more often than not, the GMOs are actually the better preference to either the conventional or the organic foods. Additionally, we can expand this to the gluten-free movement. You see this stuff on the shelves and offered at restaurants and things now. Gluten-free is everywhere. It's really quite insane. And if we go and we think about why there's such a huge craze or this movement behind the gluten-free fad, you start to break it down and see, well, what reason do people have for going without gluten in their diet? And you start to think, well, we definitely have a disease called celiac disease, where people really can't tolerate gluten. But that only impacts about 1.5% of the US population. So you're sitting here thinking, well, that can't possibly be it. We wouldn't have gluten-free everywhere on the shelves at every single place if it was just 1% of the population that was legitimately needing something without gluten. And so we start digging a little further, and we see that a number of people who have IBS or irritable bowel syndrome actually do have a sensitivity to gluten. And so if we take into account those people, that's where we can actually see an appreciable percentage. Okay, because we're seeing IBS rates increase for some reason. I don't believe we truly understand what's going on with that or why that is. But we're seeing the rates increase. And so if we're seeing the rates of IBS increase, we're seeing the rates of people who have IBS that are sensitive to gluten increase. As such, we end up with a final total of around 12%. So 12% of the US population has a legitimate reason for not needing gluten or not wanting gluten in their diet. Okay, that's appreciable. That's 1 out of 10 people. A little over that. But what is the rest of everybody's excuse? Because I see a lot of people going in the direction of this gluten-free diet. A lot more than 1 out of 10 people. And so it's begging this question, why is that? Why do we see so many people doing a diet that should have no impact on their livelihood? And it's because of this notion, this preconceived notion that they have in their minds that, oh, gluten-free is healthier for me. It's something that is so much better for my body. My body's not meant to deal with gluten. Yes, it's interesting. Very interesting look at situations like that. Just because of the fact that we think about gluten as being this wheat germ, okay, and the process to remove that is a pretty delicate process, and it almost seems like it's counterintuitive, really, this whole process of removing the wheat germ, just because of the fact that normally when you talk to people about health food types of things and nutrition, you hear one word that kind of sticks out in your mind as they're talking about these things. And they're talking about when you go to the grocery store, you want foods that look more like the way they are found in nature. So the closer you can get to the original thing, the better you are, the healthier you are. And that gets at the term processed. So the less processed a food is, the more nutritious it is. So they say. Okay, this is what these people say. So, following that logic, we are looking for things that are more like apples, just a raw apple sitting on the shelf, as being better than applesauce, which is, ground up, processed, added with a bunch of stuff to result in the applesauce. Now, following that logic, we would see things that are more processed being less healthy for you. So if we extend that to gluten-free, you start to see an interesting conundrum there. We're seeing a situation where gluten-free is being touted as healthier, even though those same people are saying that healthier things are less processed. Gluten-free is more processed. They're saying more processed equals bad. So they're saying gluten-free is bad, but it's good. Very interesting. How does that happen? That's kind of bizarre to me. Not sure how you can have something that's bad and good simultaneously. Kind of strange for me. So anyway, you end up seeing this impact with people who self-diagnose. Okay, they don't go to a doctor to establish that they're sensitive to gluten or that their body reacts negatively to it. They just self-diagnose at home and they start eating gluten-free things and they expect to feel better. And look at that, more often than not, they feel better after switching to gluten-free diet. And once again, it's predominantly mind over body. It really is. If you expect an outcome from the beginning, you're giving yourself the placebo effect. It's just that simple. And when we start dropping other factors into this situation, we start to see that interactions and the social component really plays into this too. Okay, we never really understood all of the different dynamics of placebo. and the placebo effect. But now we're starting to really understand how intricate it is. As such, we can look at the effect of social interactions on the end outcome. You know, if you go around telling people, hey, I'm taking a chemotherapy drug right now, they're going to be like, ugh, I'm sorry. There you go. You have a social reinforcement of the nocebo effect. Your friend is disgusted because they know that you're going to go through some negative effects. So it's just going to enhance your negative effects because that's the reaction that they have. Unfortunately, that just results in a worse outcome for you when you see that particular social aspect. But you also have the same type of thing happening with the placebo effect, right? So we have people that are taking a pill to make them lose weight. And you tell other people this, and they're like, hey, wow, that's awesome, that's great. Where'd you get that from? Is it working for you? And you'll sit there and, because you believe that it's working, you'll sit here and say, oh yeah, I'm starting to shed the pounds off now. And your friend will be like, oh my gosh, that's great, that's awesome. And just that positive reaction from your friend is going to further reinforce your positive outcome. Because that's just how the mind works. If it reinforces what you're already doing, it's just going to magnify the impact. We've actually seen studies that have shown that the impact of the placebo or the nocebo effect can be almost equivalent to drugs that actually legitimately cause a real impact, that have a real effect. So a person taking a sugar pill to lose weight may actually see the same amount of weight loss as a person who's taking a real pill that does work to make you shed the pounds. Those two impacts can be the same. And we've shown this in certain experiments. And that is just mind-blowing to think about. Think about how powerful the body is in trying to get us into that positive mindset, or getting us out of a negative mindset, and trying to make our lives so much better and so much more dynamic than that. And it's that kind of impact that really gets at the importance of our everyday interactions, and just the relevance of socializing, and the impact of friends and family. I mean, just thinking about all this stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, if I try to sit here and break down every single aspect of my life in every single way that somebody else can influence it, possibilities are infinite, literally infinite. If I'm sitting here taking the same thing for years on end and I think that it's helping me, then all of a sudden one day I start hanging around with a group of people that all think what I'm doing is dumb, then I can start losing my positive benefits from taking that, because all of a sudden my mindset is changing. And that's crazy to me. Try to think about that. And so with the ebb and flow of your mindset between positive and negative, it can be like a pinball game almost. It's just all over the place as far as the possibilities. It's just so hard to wrap your mind around that, oh my gosh, literally every single thing that I'm thinking and every single interaction I have influences my life in a much deeper way than it normally would, or that people would normally think about. And that's where that power of placebo just comes into play. It's just absolutely crazy thinking about that. But that basically emphasizes that even if we don't have that social interaction, that social level, we ourselves have a lot of impact on our lives. So, you can be out there living in a basement, hidden away from the world, and you can still have beneficial effects from whatever you're doing. Just because if you believe in it, then you can certainly get a positive outcome. Along with those lines, that's why every day, almost every day, I try to do this every day. Every day I try to wake up with a positive mindset. That, hey, I'm pretty awesome, I can take on this day, I can kick its butt. I can take some names, and you know what? I'll accomplish all my goals, and I'll feel good while doing it. Now, obviously, that doesn't always work. There are certain days, like today, for instance, where I'm running on 3 hours of sleep, and I'm a little loopy, and so it's a little hard for me to lock on to that. Say I'm tired as I yawn. A little hard for me to lock on to that feeling for the entire day, much less for the first few hours of the day where I just want to go back to sleep. But needless to say, it's really important. Having good self-esteem, you don't have to think that you're perfect by any means. I am not endorsing that because nobody's perfect. I aspire to be perfect, but I know that that's kind of a relative thing. I also know that's unattainable. Okay, so what's perfect for one person is definitely not perfect for everybody. And I really see some of these trends here in modern society that are in a direction of wanting to help ourselves. And that's great, because we've been kind of in a pit, we as the American people, been kind of in a pit with this whole obesity epidemic. And so just seeing that drive to get out of the hole that we've dug for ourselves is great. I love seeing that. But the thing is that we're seeing much more of that power come from within and come from a social group than it's actually coming from any of the auxiliary things that we're taking into our life. Whether it be that gluten-free diet, whether it be that body wrap, whether it be that detox tea. All that stuff is garbage for the most part. We don't need any of that stuff. What we need is a balanced diet, okay, a diet that's not pure steak, that's not pure bread, that's not pure fruit, but that is a balance of all those different things. One of the things I love talking to my students about is nutrition, because of how important nutrition is and how there are over a dozen different compounds that we get only from meat products that we don't get from plant products. And those are very, very important in your diet. And so if you switch to a vegetarian diet, because I understand you're trying to do what's best for the environment, you're trying to minimize crop usage for raising cattle, because cattle are really inefficient to raise. But we'll talk about that stuff on another show. But if you're trying to do these things, it's great that you're in the right mindset. You're trying to help the world. You're trying to feed the planet. I understand that. That's awesome. The problem is that you have to watch your vitamins and minerals along the way, because there are a number of different things that you can't get from plants. You have to get them elsewhere. You have to take some vitamin supplements or something to try to get those nutrients into your diet. Because honestly, you can start to have some real problems. We're seeing increased incidences in some of these different diseases and conditions that have never really been a problem. And part of that is in relation to shifts in our diet over time. And so with more people trying to go to the vegetarian route, they have to be careful doing that, because if you lose out on certain proteins or amino acids that your body needs to do what it does, you can start to shut down your heart, your brain, your organs without that particular nutrient in your diet. And so you can start putting yourself in a real pickle real quick in some cases. So we just have to try to be mindful of these things. That pigeonholing into one particular area typically doesn't work out the best. It's good to have a balance of all things in our diet. Take a small portion of meat in your diet instead of a 16-ounce porterhouse steak or whatever. It's really, right now in the U.S. we're trying to emphasize portion control. Okay, so we can take that first step in minimizing how much we intake the unhealthy things and maximize the other healthier things in our diet as well. So it's really about balance, just kind of picking things out and from here, there, and everywhere, so we have all the vitamins and minerals that we need in our diet. But like I said, that's where we have the placebo effect, because you can be on a vegetarian diet and you can sit there and say that you feel better, you have more energy, when in reality, you have more energy because your body's breaking its own cells down to harvest the nutrients that you are currently lacking. All right? So if you continue that, you can start to have muscle weakness and atrophy because your body is harvesting your own muscle, your own red meat, to get the nutrients that you would only be able to get by eating that red meat. And we can test for these conditions just by doing a simple blood draw and seeing if your body is literally breaking down your own muscle for nutrients, because you can't survive for very long on a malnutrition diet. Anyway, getting back to kind of what we were talking about here, the nocebo effect comes into play too, just from the fact that once we have a situation where we think we're going to have a negative outcome, where we've heard negative things happening from these different diets, well, look at that. We can expect a negative outcome. If we hear that switching over to this healthy kind of dieting food program or shakes or whatever, if we hear that you're often hungry after 2 hours and that you have these awful stomach cramps and that you start experiencing some other secondary symptoms like headaches, well, those can certainly negatively impact you as well. And it's just that importance of not only having a positive mindset, but trying to be critical of some of these different movements. Because it's really you taking the time to do a Google search, an in-depth one, not just looking at all the sites that support it. Look at both sides of the argument for whatever you're looking at. And try to rely on scientific papers as much as possible. Okay? Don't just go to this medical doctor's website, her personal website, and look at an article that she published that has no sources in it at all. That's not how you do research. Okay? Because she's going to be trying to sell you this special berry juice that comes from the Amazon and is such an awesome superfood antioxidant that you're going to be able to cure AIDS with this thing. And that's just not the case. That's ridiculous. I don't know why people can get away with stuff like that. It's just pure garbage. It's really the lowest form of snake oil salesman that I can imagine. As much as I hate mentioning snake oil, but it really is a great example of the original, some of the original instances of placebo effect, where you would have a peddler going around with his cart in a town selling this magical solution that would cure all your ailments. And sometimes that magical solution would be snake oil. And snake oil probably isn't really going to do much to help you health-wise, other than give you some nutrients, maybe some saturated fats or unsaturated fats that you actually want in your diet. But really, aside from that, probably not much. Snake oil is kind of the metric that we use just based on its popularity a couple hundred years ago. So it's a great example of how people could take something on a massive scale and have a positive effect. Like, oh, snake oil, okay, I'm going to use it to cure my headaches. Take the shot of snake oil, and look at that. Hour later, your headache's gone. So you're like, wow, that's awesome. That's so miraculous. It actually helped me. You have this aching pain in your toe. Take some snake oil. That pain could go away. You're like, wow, that snake oil is awesome. And it's because you bought that snake oil thinking it would help you. And look at that. There's an increased chance of it being able to actually help you, just because your mind helps your body along to manifest what you expect. So it really is all about fitting your expectations. And so if you expect to have a positive experience, placebo effect. If you expect to have a negative experience, the nocebo effect. Otherwise, we can see things in life that are more or less neutral. And just going back to one of the original arguments in all of existence, how can you have the good without the bad? Because if there was no dichotomy in life, there would be no joy in life. You know, it's hard to imagine a world where everybody is always happy. Because if you're always happy, how can you really know what happy is? And so this placebo and nocebo thing really does kind of play an important role in society, just because we need that kind of dichotomy. We need to be really sad, just like we need to be really happy every now and then. Okay? And it's that kind of back and forth. It's the process of going back and forth between those two that makes life so exciting. Now, obviously there are cases where you have a whole lot of bad things happen to you in a real quick succession, and that is horrible. That is miserable. But over the long run, one would hope that you would be happy, or at least, I don't know, neutral, more often than you're unhappy, or sad, or angry. And it's your personal willpower that's going to generate how that experience plays out. You know, we actually were a part of, me and my wife, we were actually a part of an event here recently in town, Haircuts for the Homeless, done by Free Thought Fort Wayne. And my wife was down there at Fryman Square giving haircuts for free to homeless people. And there were 3 other stylists, 3 other haircutters, and between the 4 of those stylists, they were able to get through 32 people. And I think it was over a period of an hour or so. So that was really cool. Being able to get down there. I took pictures at the event. My wife's mom was actually there as well. And, you know, there were a lot of people there, and they were helping, and they were interacting with the event too. But the important part was giving these homeless people some sort of positive outlook on life. Okay, because one of the bad things about being homeless, in addition to, you know, not necessarily having access to clean clothes and a shower every day, but it's just access to good grooming. Whether it be personal grooming supplies to that degree, or whether it be the money to go out and get your hair cut. So that's why it was nice to be able to give these people haircuts, you know, trim up their beards and such, because sometimes it's just that added level of self-esteem. You know, being able to look at yourself in the mirror and like what you see, just superficially, just by changing your hair, that can have such a huge impact on your outlook. Can give you that positive outlook that'll help you maybe get that job that you've been trying to apply for. You know, if you look somewhat presentable when you go in for an interview, and if you don't look homeless right off the bat, you know, I'm sorry, we are very visual people, a very visual species, and so if somebody even looks the part, it really helps them get the part that they're trying to get. Now, of course, I need to learn this lesson too. I don't always wear the best clothes. My wife periodically goes through my wardrobe and tosses certain items and buys me new items to replace those items, because honestly, I'm still wearing a lot of shirts from high school. I'm not gonna lie. And part of that has been, I've been really poor. Haven't really gotten around to focusing my finances on wardrobe. Focus much of my finances on technology, which is how I'm able to record this show. But you know what? It really is important to have that positive outlook, even when it comes to having something as superficial as a haircut or a nice shirt. It's really that first step that's going to help you move on from there optimistically. Because if you're optimistic about all that, then guess what? You can really conquer the world from that point. You have a much increased chance of being able to go through any of life's obstacles and come out maybe not on top, but maybe not as on bottom, so to speak, as you would have expected. And so that's really the importance of the placebo effect versus the nocebo effect. Just seeing how those two factors really play into your mentality and your cognitive bias and can help you succeed at anything that you approach in life. So, wish you the best. I try to wish myself the best every day. So I'm going to go to the next step and wish you the best for today and the rest of this week, so to speak. So thank you for tuning in. My name is Chris Rex, and if you wish to find any of our episodes of Based on Facts, you can find us on Facebook or on YouTube just by typing Based on Facts into the search bar. So thank you for joining me, and have a great one.